Today we're going to cover the history of the Roman Inquisition. This is the Inquisition that interrogated Galileo, and also the Inquisition that you likely know the least about. If you haven't seen my earlier videos covering the medieval and Spanish Inquisitions, check them out at the end of this video, or in the description below. But before we do that, don't forget to hit subscribe and the bell for more awesome history videos. The origins of the Roman Inquisition lies in the religious and societal developments that took place in Europe during the late Middle Ages and early modern period. From the 16th century on, Christian Europe lived uneasily in an increasingly regionalized culture, within which a number of Christian confessions professed to have found a universally true religion. These tensions between local culture and absolute truth, claimed by confessional opponents, was heightened by the advancement of the Reformation. By the 16th century, there had for a long time been many people outside and within the Roman Catholic Church who had voiced criticism against it and expressed a desire for the Church reform and do away with the corruption that had plagued it. With the advent of the Reformation, the situation had become so severe that the Catholic Church could no longer ignore the criticism that was launched against it, and under the leadership of Pope Paul III in the mid-16th century, the Roman Church undertook large-scale reforms to combat the corruption within the Church, as well as to suppress the advance of the Reformation. In 1542, Pope Paul passed the bull Licet an Initione, which officially established the organization known as the Roman Inquisition. In addition to the establishing of the Inquisition, the Pope also created the Index of Prohibited Books and Authors, which listed literature that was censored in areas controlled by the papacy. The Roman Inquisition originally consisted of 6 cardinals who were empowered by the papacy with the original aim to investigate and suppress heresy. They mainly resided in Rome, but early on their power stretched to many places on the Italian peninsula, with the Roman cardinals being able to appoint and supervise local inquisitors outside the papacy and proceed against anyone charged with heresy, regardless of rank or status, except for ecclesiastical and lay authorities. However, the power that the Roman Inquisition were able to attain outside the papal states were always contested. Local inquisitions had been created in most of the Italian states during the High and Late Middle Ages, with heresy and other related things being considered criminal in both secular and ecclesiastical tribunals. While the Inquisition in Rome was nominally superior to the other Italian inquisitions, the ability to prosecute heretics was something that the local authorities mostly preferred to do without the supervision of the papacy. Examples of this can be seen in a number of Italian city-states, insisting on that local representatives would partake in the persecution of heretics, and that severe sentences would be reviewed by the secular authorities. There are also several instances where local bishops would intervene in inquisitorial investigations if their own interests were at stake. The way the Roman Catholic Inquisition persecuted heretics took a lot of inspiration from its medieval predecessors. In prosecuting heretics, an inquisitor usually started with setting up an inquisitorial tribunal and preaching a sermon in the local public square, condemning the evils of heresy and pleading to the listeners to come forward with confessions and accusations. Later on, summonses would be handed out to suspected heretics and people who were suspected to have knowledge about heretical activity. The inquisitor would then proceed to interrogate the accusers and the suspects. When a suspect was summoned, the inquisitor usually presented the suspect with evidence that other suspects had supplied against them during earlier interrogations. The social pressure it created was very effective, since the reward for immediate confessions were substantial compared to the steep penalties for elapsing or refusing to repent. When the interrogations were over and guilt was established, accused heretics were asked if they wished to abjure their heresy. If they said yes, they were given a penance which took the form of a badge of shame that the heretic had to wear in public for a time, with the purpose of stigmatizing the heretic, while at the same time making sure that he or she was still part of the Catholic community. If the suspected heretic refused to repent, he or she would either face a prison sentence that could last for life, or be handed over to the civil authorities for punishment, which almost always resulted in the heretic's execution. The main task for the Roman Inquisition and its subordinated tribunals in its early years was combating the advance of Protestantism on the Italian peninsula, and in this mission the Inquisition of Rome was largely successful. By the late 16th century, most Protestant forces had been suppressed in Italy, and the Roman Inquisition then turned most of its focus away from its original mission and mainly came to work with religious deviances among lay Catholics and witchcraft. The scholar Edward Peter notes that the prosecutions of people related to these subjects show a high level of caution among the inquisitors. When interrogating people for religious deviances, the Roman inquisitors often displayed a high degree of understanding of the people they interrogated. In most instances, the inquisitors understood that a lack of consistent pastoral guidance could result in misunderstandings of doctrine and liturgy, and they adopted a high tolerance for all but the most unavoidably severe circumstances. When prosecuting people who were accused of witchcraft, the Roman Catholic Inquisitors generally viewed such accusations with a lot of skepticism. Witchcraft was generally seen as superstition by the Roman Inquisitors and was made a capital crime first in 1623, and then only in cases in which it was established that the person accused of witchcraft actually had injured someone. In an age when the horrible witch trials were raging in many places in Europe and America, this lenient attitude towards accusations of witchcraft was something that distinguished the Roman Inquisition from other tribunals, and it was also something that the inquisitors were criticized for by the civil authorities in several of the Italian states where the Roman Inquisition was influential. Similar to its medieval and Spanish counterparts, the Roman Inquisition were allowed to deploy torture during its interrogations. The Roman Inquisition's torture devices and practices that was allowed to be used was restricted by the papal authorities, and the most common torture device used by the Roman Inquisitors were torture by a rope, in which the victim is being hoisted in mid-air by a rope that was tied to his wrist, which created a lot of pressure on his shoulders. As with the medieval and Spanish Inquisitions, torture was seldom used in interrogations, and a confession that was given by a suspect while being subject to torture was needed to be repeated 24 hours later in order for the confession to be viewed as legitimate. The number of people executed by the Roman Inquisition has been hard to establish due to much of the inquisitorial records having been lost during the occupation of the Papal States by the French Empire during the Napoleonic Wars. However, similar to its medieval and Spanish counterparts, the number of death sentences are most likely to be low, and probably even lower than that of the medieval and Spanish Inquisition, given what we know about the Roman Inquisition. Of over 1500 known trials by the Roman Inquisition in Venice between 1541 and 1592, which is during the height of the Roman Inquisition's operations, only 22 resulted in death sentences, which is less than 1%. As the centuries passed, the power of the Roman Inquisition gradually diminished, which correlated with the diminishing political power of the Papal States. By the 18th century, it had virtually lost all of its power and influence outside the Papal States, and its chief occupation were by this time simply to investigate clerical immorality and to enforce censorship. The Inquisition was temporarily disbanded during Napoleon's annexation of Rome in the early 1800s. It was re-established with the restoration of the papacy in 1814, but during the 19th century, its power and influence continued to diminish. Its activity became even more curtailed with the rise of the Italian nation-state, and in the late 19th century, it was transformed into functioning as an advisory committee to the popes, and the organization would change names several times during the 20th century. In 1965, Pope Paul VI changed its name to the Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and since then the former Roman Inquisitors has acted as chief advisors to the popes on matters of theology and ecclesiastical discipline. The organization still remains to this day, even though it by now hardly can be thought of as an inquisition. I hope you liked this short Inquisition documentary, and if you want to learn more about Inquisition history, check out my videos on the medieval and Spanish Inquisitions. And don't forget that if you like this video and want to see more awesome history videos like it, hit the like, share and subscribe buttons.